Okay, top of Lamed Aleph, 31a, top of the page. And as I pointed out to Jules, today is my last weekday. Tomorrow will be the last day. Okay. Again, discussion here of the concept of Cheskas Gimel Shanim, the Chazaka that takes 3 years to achieve, and a number of different scenarios. Each one is designed to bring out a specific point. Another few stories. Okay, so each guy says, this is my ancestral homeland. I've been here forever. My grandparents bought this property. Now, obviously, as you probably can figure out, only one of those claims could be true. Okay, so what happened? So, obviously, one guy brings witnesses that prove that it was his ancestral place. He's been there for a very long time. But this guy, he brings contemporaneous evidence. The other guy proves his grandfather was there, or his father was there. And this guy proves that that he was there for 3 years and nobody said anything. So Amar Rabba says, and here's a critical concept. This is a concept that's often referred to in Taisvis and other Rishonim as what we call migu, since. Let's explain it. Mal Shakar. Why should he lie? In other words, the guy who has the contemporaneous evidence that he's eaten the chazaka, he's eaten 3 years. Mal Shakar. Why would he lie if it didn't belong to his grandparents? If he wanted, he could have said, he could have told the guy, it's true, it's your ancestral homeland, but I bought it from you 3 years ago. And I've been living there for 3 years. And therefore it's no longer yours. Had he made that argument, then he would win the case. Meaning, one guy proves it belonged to his father. Okay, shkoyach, I appreciate that. It's very helpful. It is helpful, but at the end of the day, maybe you sold it, 5 minutes ago or 5 years ago. You haven't proven that. Now this guy, he proves he's been here the past 3 years. That should be sufficient to prove that it belongs to him. What about the fact that clearly his claim is false? This is the tension here, because he's claiming it's his ancestor's place. The problem is it can't be his ancestors. Can only be only one person can own the property. So it's either Reuven's grandfather or Shimon's grandfather. And if Reuven's proving it's his grandfather, then when Shimon says it belonged to his grandfather, he's clearly lying. So now we have this difficulty, we have this tension. Clearly, the proof here is on the balance of Shimon, who's been here for the past 3 years. He clearly should be the victor of this case. Why should he be victor? Why should he win the case? Because he's been here for 3 years, and the fact that it belonged to your grandfather doesn't prove that it's yours today. And the fact that I was here in the past 3 years does prove that it's mine today. However, remember, chazaka must have a taina. It must have chazaka alone. The fact that I lived there for 3 years doesn't prove anything. It instantiates your claim, right? That's what we explained. If a guy, for example, lives on a property, welcome back. If a guy lives on a property for 3 years, and he lives on a property for 3 years, and they say, okay, well, what are you doing here? He says, I don't know, I'm a squatter. I've just been here. He doesn't own the property because chazaka all chazaka does is it replaces a document. It instantiates the document as a claim. It instantiates a claim. If you don't have a claim, then chazaka is not going to help you. If you say I squatted here for 3 years, it doesn't make it yours. The chazaka only supports a claim. The problem in this story is that the guy has the contemporaneous chazaka against the other guy's ancient history. So ancient history doesn't prove it's yours today. 3 years chazaka does prove it's yours. But what does it prove? Insofar, it proves what your argument is, what your claim is. The problem is his claim is problematic because his claim is clearly false. He says it belonged to his ancestor, and it's not true. It didn't belong to his ancestor. It belonged to Reuven's ancestor. We're together on the difficulty. So he has the chazaka, but the chazaka is only good insofar that it supports a claim. If the claim is not valid, the chazaka shouldn't be good. I'm not saying it shouldn't. There's the tension there. There's a tension. So Rabba says he wins the case. Why does he win the case? Because Malal Shakar, he's clearly not lying about the fact that it belonged to his grandfather. Because if he was lying about it, then he would have had a much better lie. What was the lie he would have had? I bought it from you. If he tells Reuven, I bought the property, we're in Tav Lamed Aleph Amid Aleph. Very briefly, there were two people. They both claimed it belonged to their ancestor. One guy brought proof it belonged to his ancestor. The other guy brought proof he ate 3 years. And so Rabbi says, Mal and Shakra, the guy who eats 3 years, why should he lie? If he was lying, he would have had a much better lie. The lie would be, I bought it from you. I bought it from Reuven recently, past 4 years. And therefore, Reuven's evidence is null and void. It's not helpful. It's not null. It's true. It could be that it's interesting history for the books, but it makes no difference today because Reuven could have sold the property. And therefore, even though Shimon's claim is contradicted by witnesses, the witnesses that say it didn't belong to Shimon's ancestor, it belongs to Reuven's ancestor, doesn't make a difference. Clearly, if he was trying to lie, he would make a more useful lie. And therefore, we still believe.
Okay.
It doesn't get easier. Okay. No, it gets later, but the story gets a little more complicated. Okay, this specific story. Okay. Fine. Abayis says to him, okay, what's the idea here? Rab is saying, look, if he wanted to lie, he would have had a better lie. So clearly he isn't lying. So I hear that's an interesting art. It's an interesting way to prove that you're trying to say the truth. But it doesn't undermine the fundamental point, which is that, like, the best case scenario is that this is a super duper trustworthy guy. But at the end of the day, there are two witnesses that are contradicting him. And the Torah says that we adjudicate according to witnesses and not according to some super duper trustworthy guy. So inasmuch as the fact that he would have had a better lie proves his point, but it is insufficient against two witnesses. Two witnesses say it belongs to Reuven's ancestor, meaning it doesn't belong to Shimon's ancestor. It does not belong to Shimon's ancestor. Now that Shimon could have had a better lie, fine, he could have, but he didn't. And at the end of the day, he's not believed. And therefore it remains a chazaka she'ein imataino. Chazaka only works to prove a claim. If the claim here is clearly false, because witnesses are saying it's false, then chazaka is not helpful.
What if you're winning?
Then of course he'd win. So then of course he'd win the case. He has the contemporary proof. He has an explanation of how it belongs to him. Of course he wins the case.
The fact that the witnesses.
The witnesses here are not contradicting his chazaka; they're contradicting his claim.
Right. Yeah.
So because they're contradicting his claim, if we could take time, it's not a long daf today. Because they're contradicting his claim, Abayis says, look, the claim is undermined, the chazaka isn't useful. Chazaka is only good to replace the document. The document is the claim. Chazaka sort of, instead of having the document around because nobody wants to wash the document from the rats, so he has a chazaka. But what does the document say? It doesn't say Shimon squatted on this land for 3 years. It says Shimon purchased the land, he received it as a gift, he got it from his ancestor, etc. Okay, fine. But as like I said, the story gets more complicated. Hadar Amrlai, then so they're busy, right? The two judges, Abai and Rav, are busy fighting this one out. Right? Rav says we believe him because he would have had a better lie. And Abai says would have had a better lie is not sufficient evidence against witnesses. And then the guy says, Amrlai, in the Avasachi Zavinta Minoch. So the Shimon here, the guy who has the chazaka, he says, you know something? The truth of the matter was it really did belong to Reuven's ancestor. And I bought it from Reuven's ancestor. The Haida Amrloch, the Avasahi, and the reason why I said it belongs to my ancestor, I didn't mean it literally. The Samachli Allah Kida Avasi. It was as if it belonged to my ancestor. Since I purchased the field long ago, and I've been living here for a very long time, so it's as if it's my ancestral field. No. There's one problem with this, which is the guy's sort of changing his mind in court. First, he's pursuing one defense strategy, And then all of a sudden he changes his strategy. And this is significant. Why? Because he's really undermining his first argument. He's basically disposing it by saying he was engaging in hyperbole. Nobody thought he was engaging in hyperbole until that point. Now, all of a sudden, oh, I wasn't serious. I just meant it as a joke. So, okay, so now what do we do? So the Gemara asks, Toyin v'chayzer v'toyin, ein chayzer v'chayzer, ein toyin v'chayzer v'toyin. Are you allowed to do that in court? Can you sort of significantly change your mind? You really, he's, I wouldn't say he's directly contradicting what he previously said, but he's definitely undermining it. This is not like an addition or an emendation of what he previously said. This is a seriously undermining. He's saying he basically what he's saying is he made a joke. You know, he engaged in metaphor. So what's the deal? Ula says, Tayin v'chayzer v'tayin, it is permitted. You can come with a new argument that undermines your previous argument. Now, Ardoi say, Ein Tayin v'chayzer v'tayin, you cannot engage in this type of behavior. Now the Gemara points out to what would be acceptable, what either side would admit to the other side. Ula agrees. Even Ula says, allows this type of change of the argument when he explains his previous argument away. So meaning previously he said it belonged to my ancestor, now he's saying, I didn't mean it seriously. But when he clearly contradicts it, for example, the guy says it belonged to my ancestors and not yours. So there's definitely contradiction here by saying, "Oh, I meant that you can't make a metaphor out of it if you purchased it. If you agree you purchased it from Reuben's father, then what you said before is false."
Right.
So therefore, in that scenario, Ula says you cannot change your argument. In other words, you can only change your argument when you sort of amend it or explain how the previous argument fits with what you currently say, even if it's a significant change, a significant deviation of what was previously being argued. But to do it without making that argument, without saying, "Look, I made a mistake. I was lying," or whatever. It was an incorrect argument, without explaining how it might have been useful, is not acceptable. Yes. Okay. 1 second. Yeah. Another example. Even according to Ula. So in our scenario, the scenario of Reuben and Shimon, where Shimon had the chazaka and Reuben had the witnesses that belonged to his father, that scenario, they were still in court when Shimon all of a sudden says, "Oh, never mind. I bought it from his ancestor. I was joking." In that case, that change of heart happened in court. However, let's say Shimon would not have made that argument in court. And then he left court. And then he comes back and changes his mind. He cannot change his mind. My timer, what's the reason? We suspect that he had a good lawyer that explained that taught him how to change his mind. We don't believe him to say that it changed his mind, and therefore he can't do it. Okay. Now Ardoi says you can't do this changing of your mind in court. It doesn't work. Ardoi agrees. One second. Now, Ardoi agrees that when you add details so in our scenario, he undermined what he previously said. First, he said, my ancestor had the property. And now he's saying, no, I meant that metaphorically. But where you add to what you previously said, it is permitted. For example, let's say the guy says, my ancestor's property. And then he adds to it, he says, because my ancestor bought it from your ancestor. That would be permitted. My father bought it from your father, would be permitted because in that case you're just adding to what you previously said. You're not undermining it. Okay. Okay, this is obviously very, very they ask you a question and it's in the middle of investigation. I can't tell you anything. Right? So if the guy makes this argument, he says they meet outside of court and the guy says some argument. He makes some claim. And then they get to court and the guy makes an entirely different claim. No problem at all. Why? My time of an it is the case that a person will not reveal his argument except to a court. He's sort of tricking the guy. He doesn't want to engage with him outside of court. There's nothing wrong with making up a story outside of court, and when you get to court, you give the good arguments. Amar Meimar says, I am the opinion of Nahardoi. Was Sfirli the Chayzer V'Tayin. And now the Gemara previously said Nahardoi forbids undermining what you previously said. Meimar says, no, I come from Nahardoi, and I'd say it is permitted. You're allowed to do this. The Hilchasa and halacha is Tayin V'Chayzer V'Tayin. You can give an argument in front of the court, and then you can change your mind and give a different argument. Next scenario. One guy says it's my father's. The other guy says it's my father's. Okay, what happened? Okay, so now we have a major problem. We have a definite set of liars. So two witnesses say that a pair of two witnesses come and say that this Reuven he ate the field. He collected the yield of the field for 3 years, and it belonged to his father. And the other set of witnesses say he was here for the past 3 years. Now, one of these two sets of witnesses is definitely lying. Only one of them could have been in the field at the same time over the past 3 years, or at least insofar that they're claiming that they're not claiming it was a partnership, right? Each one's claiming it belongs to him, and they're claiming that they got it from their father, so it didn't belong to the other guy. So clearly, we have contradicting witnesses. Now, the problem here is that one of the sets of witnesses also points out that it belonged to his father. So do we use that half of their testimony? So let's explain. Omer of Nachman says, let's line it up. Uki achila lebahadi achila. We have, with regard to the eating the past 3 years, who ate from the field? We have contradicting evidence. So what should we do? We should say they cancel each other out. So what are we left with? Vuki ara b'cheskes avasa. And what we're left is with testimony that it belonged to one of their fathers. And that's the winning testimony. And that guy gets to keep it. They both make a claim that it belonged to their father, but only one of them has witnesses to prove it.
No.
Each of them has witnesses that they were here for the past 3 years using the field.
Only one pair of witnesses indicates that.
Right, exactly. But now the question here is, do we look at the testimony and say, well, the testimony on the field on who ate from the field cancels each other out? Because clearly it's contradicting testimony. And we're left remainder with testimony of whose father it belonged to, and that guy wins the case. Or do we say, no, they're so unreliable that they contradicted each other. We can't use the rest of their testimony. We don't know who's a liar. One of these guys is definitely a liar. Maybe it's the guy who says that it belonged to his father. Amalei Rava disagrees with Rav Nachman. He says, this is a contradicting testimony. Once they're contradicting each other, you can't rely on it at all. And if you can't rely on it, neither can you rely on the portion that says that it belonged to his father. So if Nachman says, it's true the contradiction is on who ate from the field. But there's no contradiction about whose father was in the property. In other words, there's only one set of witnesses that's testifying that the claimed owner's father owned the property. There's no contradiction, because if there's no contradiction, they should be the winning team. In other words, Are you focusing on the testimony and they cancel each other out, and one of them has extra testimony, which is the winning testimony? Or do we say, no, look at the people. The people are both, I don't know, 50% liars, right? Somebody here is clearly not saying the truth. If that's the case, the people are 50% liars, then how can you rely on them? How can you rely on one of them? There's a 50% chance that he's a liar. So you can't use anything. Okay. So the Gemara proposes that this falls right in line with a separate question, similar question. Okay. Lema Rav of Rav Nachman, Plukta Rav Huna of Rav Chisda. Okay, this debate here, whether we're focusing on the person or whether we're focusing on the testimony, is dependent on a similar debate between Rav Huna and Rav Chisda. Let's explain. The Itnar we learned. Beis Kita Edim Hamachishas Zuasu. You have contradicting testimony. Amar Rav Huna says, Zuba b'fnei atzmam ida, v'zuba b'fnei atzmam ida. Let's say another case comes to court. Each pair of witnesses could testify, even though there's a 50% chance that they're lying. It's still okay. They're still able to testify. Rav Chisda says, what do you mean? V'hadi sadi shakri lomali. Why are we engaging with 50% liars? Once you're a 50% liar on one testimony, then we don't rely on you for anything else. So should be a similar debate. Lame Rav Nachman says we focus on the testimony. The Amar Rav Huna, he focuses on Rav Huna that says they could have another separate testimony, even though they contradicted in some other area. Rav Chisda, and Rava goes to Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says that because they're contradicted, they're presumed liars. Because they're 50% liars, we presume them to be liars. So therefore, we don't rely on them for anything. Now we should point out there is a legitimate way to create to point out that witnesses are lying. It's not by contradicting them; it's by undermining their testimony, by arguing that they were in a different location at the time that they claimed to be, and therefore they could never have testified. Okay, that's a side point. Okay, now I'll leave it to Rav Chisda. Kula amalei pligi. Okay, Rav Chisda that says that that these two contradicting witnesses are useful in other court cases, each said as its own. So it's very important to understand. Let's say the four witnesses are Yisachar and Zevulun and Dan and Naphtali, right? Yisachar and Zevulun, obviously they're not brothers. So Yisachar and Zevulun that aren't brothers, and Dan and Naphtali that aren't brothers, they're contradicting each other. Clearly, one of each group cannot testify, because each guy basically is testifying with a partner that he views as a certain liar. They'd only be able to testify as individuals or as both separate, as one of the two groups, but they can't overlap. Okay. So now Rav Chisda says that they could contradicting witnesses could testify in another case. He clearly is going with the opinion of Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman that says that they can that because one set of witnesses also testifies that it belongs to the guy's father. Therefore, we rely on that testimony. Meaning, there were two in our scenario. There were two sets of witnesses. One set of witnesses said 3 years plus your father. The other set of witnesses said no, just 3 years. So they're contradicting on the 3 years.
Yeah.
But the other father, that again, according to Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda, we focus on the testimony. This is a different set of different testimony. It's fine. You can rely on it. Okay. Give me a second here. Okay. Okay, so Rav Chisda is definitely going. Rav Chisda that says that you can testify in another testimony, and Rav Nachman who says we believe that extra component of the testimony, which is that it belonged to your father. That definitely there is no one who disagrees that Rav Nachman could go with Rav Chisda. I'm sorry, 1 second. I'm sorry. Mistake here. No. Sorry. Rav Chisda says that. Sorry, I made a mistake here. Rav Chisda says that you cannot rely on their test. You cannot rely on them forever. on any other issue. If you're contradicting witnesses in one case, no, you're unreliable from that point onward. Because you're a 50% liar, that must be the opinion of Rava, where Rava says you do not rely on them saying that the property belonged to the guy's father, because they're contradicted in one instance, they're contradicted forever. In every scenario. No one debates that. However, according to Rav Huna, that says that we would believe them on a different case. Rav Nachman to Rav Huna. Rav Nachman would fit in perfectly with Rav Huna, because Rav Nachman says we believe them on the extra component that it belonged to the guy's father. However, according to Rava, Adka like Amar Rav Huna el edus acheres avo edus loy. Okay, so Rav Huna says, even according to Rav Huna, that says that we would rely on contradicting. That we would rely on contradicting testimony in a different case. Rava would argue that that's only a different case, but in the same case, an extra detail that belonged to the guy's father, we would not rely on that. And therefore, both Rava and Rav Nachman could disagree, even according to the opinion of Rav Huna. Even though in a different scenario, Rava would argue that it could be that we would believe contradicting witnesses, but in the same testimony, with just an additional detail, we would not. Okay, fine, but the case gets more complicated, of course. Then the guy, so there's two guys, right? One guy has testimony that he was on the field for the past 3 years and it belonged to his father. The other guy says he was on the field for 3 years. He lost the case, right? Rav Nachman said the other guy's right because he has witnesses that it belonged to his father. Same witnesses. So the other guy, the guy who didn't have the witnesses, you know what he did? He brought the witnesses. I don't know. He may have done that too. We don't know. He definitely brought them.
Oh, he brought them.
He definitely brought them, but he may have bought them too. Because clearly here there's a liar. There's definitely a liar. The question is if the other guy bought a big package of lies and this guy is telling the truth with the second witnesses, or the first guy saying the truth, the second guy, because he bought one set of lies, he might as well buy another pair of lies. Okay. So we don't know what to do. Amar of Nachman. So Nachman says, well, now the previous guy who won the case, he lost his winning advantage, right? So now what do we do? Okay, well, now he lost his advantage, so we previously allowed him to win the case. Now we're gonna take the property away from him. How are we gonna figure out, by the way, who gets this property? We're gonna do a Kol Da'alam Kvar. Kol Da'alam Kvar is one of a few methods of resolving questions. It's typically reserved for such scenarios where you have contradicting witnesses. There's no way you'll be able to ever resolve that. And therefore, the solution is you make a race, and the stronger, faster guy, he wins. Whoever is stronger and faster pushes the guy off the property is the one that gets the property.
Oh.
So we remove the guy who we previously gave an advantage to, we take him off the property. And then we say, hands off, let the stronger man win. Well, we'll discuss it at more. I don't know if I'll discuss it with you, but you'll discuss it at more length in the coming days. Okay. There's a few other ways to do it. We spoke about in the past. We spoke about yachloiku, right? Splitting it. Yachloiku would make sense, but not with his contradicting witnesses. Yachloiku makes sense if there's no witnesses at all and there's no way to resolve the case. Then you could say, okay, split it. But over here, definitely somebody gets it, and definitely somebody's lying. Yachloiku is not going to work. Another method is called shuda. Shuda is a circumstantial evidence. The classical example is a guy had two friends. Problem here is that they both had the same name. And he wrote his name was Tuvia. That was the guy's name. We spoke about this in Subis. Nechsil Tuvia. And Tuvia has, there's two Tuvias. Okay. And by the way, I didn't make up that name. It's the Gemara. That's the name the Gemara chose. So now the question is sort of, okay, the guy leaves his will for Tuvia, his friend. Which Tuvia? So the judges now could do like a circumstantial process and try to get the guys to each prove who was the closer friend. So each guy could sort of support his case, and the judges sort of decide on their own. It's an arbitrary decision. It's not grounded in Jewish law. The idea that we should determine which is a closer friend to figure out what his will meant is not a legitimate. It's not an established halachic process. The process here is called shuda. The judges are going to use their own intuition to use such a process and try to figure it out. So again, it should clearly here is not going to work. We don't have a question of, sort of circumstantial details. We have two people, one of them is lying. We know that for certainty. So therefore, that method isn't going to work either. So we're left with kol da'alam gvar, let the strongest man win. It literally means kol da'alam, whoever is stronger, gvar, he wins. Okay. So Rav Nachman basically takes the advantage away from the party that had the witnesses that say it belonged to his father, because now both parties have those witnesses. And critically, we're not concerned for the disgrace of the court. As this looks a little bit embarrassing to the court. First they gave it to one guy, then they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, you don't have the advantage, we're taking you off." And now, flags down, go. Okay. Masav Rava v'tamer of Zeira. Rava had a question. Some say it was Zeira's question. Shnayim Amr Meis, Shnayim Amr Loy Meis. You have two witnesses that say that a woman's husband died, and another set of witnesses that say her husband didn't die. Shnayim Amr Niskarsha. Two witnesses say she's divorced. Shnayim Amr Loy Niskarsha. Two witnesses say she's not divorced. Harezu Loy Tinase. She should not get married. The Imnis, and if she did get married, Loy Tate, she doesn't leave the marriage. Okay, what's the point there? The point is that that once the court decides something, then we don't change it. The court decided she's allowed to get married. She got married because a witness, and then another set of witnesses came and said, no, her husband didn't die. So the court says, well, we don't know what to do now. But we're not going to embarrass the court. We're not going to disgrace the court. So we're not changing our minds.
So these two sets of witnesses are contemporaneous.
Correct. One permitted her. She got married. We'll get to it in a second. Whatever. It depends. According to the first opinion, they could have come at the same time. They could have even come at the same time. Once she gets married, we're not going to stop her. And again, because we don't know what to do, so we're not going to stop her. Okay. 1 second. Rav Menachem Bar Yosi Amar Teitze. Rav Menachem Bar Yosi says no, she has to leave her marriage. And Amar Rav Menachem Bar Yosi, Rav Menachem explains. When do I say she has to leave the marriage? If the witnesses came contemporaneously, they came at the same time, contradicting each other, she has no business getting married. If she does, we stop her. We tell her she has to leave the marriage. However, but let's say one set of witnesses came and permitted her, and then she got married, and then another set of witnesses came. What do? We're not going to say that she has to leave. Why are we not going to force her to leave the marriage? Because we're not going to disgrace the courts. She did marry. Her marriage was permitted at the time, and therefore now that the court doesn't know what to do, we're not going to force her to leave the marriage. Clearly, here we're concerned for the disgrace of the court. The court shouldn't just be switching opinions when it doesn't know what to do. So Amar Leis, Rav Nachman said. Rav Nachman says. 1 second. I'm sorry. Rav Nachman says, I was going to validate my case. I was going to continue with my ruling that we have to take off the guy who I previously gave an advantage to. However, you asked me this question, and not only that, Rav Hamnuna in Syria also asked the same question. I'm not going to change my mind. Okay, and guess what happened? Nafak Avid Uvda. Rav Nachman went out, and he didn't change his ruling. So he promised he would change the ruling, and then he didn't listen to what he promised. He kept his ruling standing. Mandachaz, somebody who saw it, Savra to Usi Biyadi. He thought Rav Nachman was mistaken. Like either he was mistaken for changing his mind, or he's mistaken for doing something, for following through with his court case and removing the guy we previously gave an advantage to. However, V'lohi, that's not correct. Rav Nachman's opinion that we're not concerned with the disgrace of the court is supported by great ropes. Ashli Ravavi. These are great halakhic opinions. Okay, what are these great opinions? That we'll have to leave for tomorrow. That's sort of where the discussion will take us off. Okay. Have a great day, and looking forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. It's our last day.
Your last day.